Hi, Prescott, and welcome to another Prescott E-News Prescott Talk Show. My name's Glen Martin, and I have a really very unique show today. So what I'm asking you to do is go get yourself a cup of coffee, iced tea, a lemonade, or maybe even a beer, and listen to this next story because it is incredible. I'm going to introduce to you a gentleman who goes out and finds MIA crash sites from World War II and brings our guys home. My next guest will be Clayton Kuhles of MIA Recovery. Clayton, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
You bet. You know, you got an amazing story. And I don't know if anybody listened to, well, I'm sure a lot of people listened to Chris Kuknio, and I listened to it and I got, man, I have got to get this guy on the show and bring some spotlight to your mission. But
Sure.
Before we get into that, a little bit about you. You're a local Prescott guy, been here for a long time.
Since the 80s.
Yeah. And how in the world did you get involved in this?
Well, I've loved mountains and mountain climbing since I was a little kid. And beginning in the 90s, I started climbing big mountains in Nepal, Tibet, South America. And I witnessed a couple severe accidents where guys died on mountains, and I fell into a couple crevasses and almost died myself. And my mountaineering buddy up in Durango said, you know, Clay, mountaineering is what we live for, but it's actually a very selfish, vain pursuit because it doesn't benefit anybody, doesn't help make the world a better place. And I kind of saved that thought in the back of my mind. And then in the fall of 2002, I was in northern Burma to climb a mountain called Kakaburazi, which is the highest peak in Southeast Asia at 19,000 foot. And it's a 2-week trek through the jungle just to get to the base of the mountain. So I had to hire a team of porters from this local tribe called the Kachins. And one day while at the base camp on Kakaburazi, my guide came up to me and said, you know, there's a conversation going on right now between two of our porters, and you might find it interesting what they're talking about. So I couldn't imagine what they'd be talking about that'd be interesting to me. So I went over and I spoke to the men, and through an interpreter I learned that they were talking about an old airplane wreck. And neither of them had actually been there or seen it, but one of them had heard the story from another Kachin man in a remote village to our southwest, up on the border with India. And I was fascinated because this area was so remote and it was so difficult just to get there with my supplies to climb this mountain. I just couldn't believe that an airplane would even fly over the area, much less crash there. And whose airplane would it be? So when I finished climbing Kakaburazi, I went to the village where this man lived, and I found him. And through an interpreter, I was able to cajole him into taking me up to this crash site. So we went up. It was a really tough trek through the jungle and jungle rivers. And 4 days later, we got up on this ridge, and sure enough, there's remains of an old U.S. Army Air Corps C-47. And a C-47 is a military variant of a DC-3. C stands for cargo, so it's a cargo aircraft. And I probably lost some ID plates, and I took them down to the U.S. Embassy in Rangoon, and I was able to speak with our defense people there. And they said, well, Clayton, you've just found one of the aircraft that disappeared on the hump. And I said, what's the hump?
Yeah.
They looked at me like I was an idiot. And so they told me about the hump airlift. It was the largest airlift in world history, even bigger than the Berlin airlift right after the war. And over 600 aircraft went down. Most have never been found. Over 2,000 airmen are still missing and unaccounted for on this route between Northeast India and southwestern China. And what brought them down was these mountains generated icing, very, very severe icing, because it's the eastern end of the Himalayas. So anyway, they wanted me to give them a full report with the GPS coordinates. I said, well, sorry guys, but my GPS batteries are dead and I didn't have any replacement batteries, so I don't have an accurate fix on the location. So they begged me to go back, and I said, well, maybe next year. I'm finished for this year. So I came back the next year. I went back to that village and found the Kachin man, and he said, sure, I'll take you back, but I tell you what, I know of another site across the border in India, a much bigger site, and how about we go there first, and then we'll circle back and we'll revisit the C-47 site. So of course I immediately said yes. I didn't have to think about that very long.
That's amazing because these these crashes are 75 years old at least.
Yes, that's correct.
So it's probably generation to generation who have passed these sites on.
It's all verbal history there.
Yeah.
A lot of the people are even illiterate. They can't even read their own national language. A lot of them don't even speak the national language. They speak a tribal dialect.
Yeah.
And a written language is unheard of to them. You show them a map and they don't even know top from bottom, north from south. It's just Greek to them. So, but my guide from my Burmese guide, he said, man, we can't cross the border. What in case we get caught? You know, we could all get arrested and he could lose his license and be in trouble with the Burmese government. So I said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't you just stay here and I'll go with these guys and I'll communicate by sign language. So basically I shamed them into going with me.
Yeah.
So we went across the border over all these mountain ranges. We got in this remote corner of India and sure enough, the remains of a 4-engine aircraft and there's literally human bones laying all over the place. And this is around 11,000 feet up on this mountainside, no trees or vegetation. And we spent several days there. We eventually found the data plate for the aircraft and had the serial number. And that's extremely rare to find something that small. It's like finding the ID tag of one of the airmen. It's almost impossible to find something that tiny. So we found the ID plate. We gathered up all the remains, the leather jackets, boots, anything of a personal artifact nature. And we brought all that back across the border into Burma. And then, sure enough, I was stopped by Burmese intelligence. They took me all apart, confiscated everything, and I thought I was going to go to jail, but they released me after a lengthy phone call they had with their supervisor. And so I finally met up with my friends from the U.S. Embassy, and they knew all about it. And I said, how do you know all about this? Well, when he was on that phone call talking to his superior, I was standing next to him, and I speak fluent Burmese, so I heard the conversation real time. And when they said, go ahead and release him, but impound everything, he said, I just kept my mouth shut. I didn't let on that I understood the conversation. So anyway, everything was turned over to the U.S. Embassy about a month later. And then the U.S. Embassy sent it to our DNA lab at Pearl Harbor. And that was a 4-engine aircraft, a cargo variant of a B-24. There were 5 crew members aboard. And of the remains that I brought out, 3 of those airmen were positively identified through DNA matching. So 3 of the 5 were identified. And there was a lot of publicity, and I was invited to attend one of the ceremonies out in Petaluma, which was an incredibly powerful event. And I'll never forget that as long as I live, meeting those families. And when I was at the event, I got there early, and this is the first time I met them face to face. And they, after a few minutes conversation, they said, well, Clayton, we want you to deliver the eulogy. I said, I've never delivered a eulogy in my life. And besides, I'm not even related to the man, Private Mervyn Sims. So, well, what would you like me to speak about? Well, we want you to tell us how you found Mervyn. And I says, are you sure you want to hear that? It's more of an adventure, mountaineering story. I'm not sure it'd be appropriate for a ceremony like this. They said, don't leave out a word. We want to hear everything. So I stood up there in front of the crowd and I recalled from memory exactly how this entire process developed and how the remains were found by talking with this gentleman and going across the border, and then everything being seized by Burmese military intelligence and the whole story. And they were spellbound.
But that's got to be incredible for the family. After 75, 80 years, you're bringing their loved ones home, and typically they're probably the second generation. Or third. So, I mean, that's got to be very powerful.
Yeah.
To the family, to everybody's involved.
And I met 2 elderly ladies there in the front row, and so I knew they were honored guests. Turned out that they knew this boy back in the 30s, and they dated him in the 30s. And they stood there in front of the TV cameras talking about him like just yesterday.
Yeah.
And that was so neat because they had personal memories of this young man back in the 30s before the war broke out.
So this has become a mission for you.
It's my passion.
You have really, now, we were talking a little bit before we turned the cameras on. You found 26 sites.
That's correct.
Now, and how long have you been doing this?
Well, that first discovery was 2002. And there's been a few years where I did not have an expedition. That's because I just didn't have the money to pay for it.
Sure.
So if someone were to go to my website and see some years where there was no expedition, it's because there was no money to pay for it.
What's it cost to do one of these?
Well, I budget $15,000 per expedition, and that would be like a 2-month expedition.
Yeah.
And during a 2-month expedition, I can usually reach at least 2, sometimes 3, even 4 sites during that period. And I just returned from Chile, and a friend went with me, and we split the cost 50-50, but it still came out to over $9,000. So
When you go to these sites, and this is kind of a touchy subject, do you feel the crewmen are still there?
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, people
You feel
who,
like you're being guided at all?
I do, absolutely, yeah. When I find these sites, it's almost always a series of unexplainable coincidences. You know, I hear a lot of people say, "No, I don't believe in coincidence." Well, I do, because it's happened to me at almost every site that I've been to. I meet one person, they direct me to somebody else, they know somebody else, and each step has to fall into place exactly right, and it always does. And then when I get to the sites, I can feel the spirits of the men there. And I mean, I can recount at least a half a dozen very specific sites where I was ready to abandon the search for a number, because I need a number. The only way to identify an aircraft is through a number, construction number or tail number, wing number. And it just seemed like there was something guiding me to look in one more location or to flip over a particular piece of metal or something. And so I absolutely do believe in coincidences.
Yeah, and there was something there.
Always.
Unbelievable.
Every single
not
site.
Unbelievable. I think closure goes both ways for
Yes,
the
it
family
does.
and for the crewmen. You know, they want to come home too.
Sure.
And it doesn't matter how long they've been out there.
Yeah, I feel the spirits of the men out there, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's interesting, if you guys want to look at Clayton's website, you've actually got pictures of some of the sites that you excavated, and I went on there and I found them very interesting. You know, that first of all, they've been there for 80 years, 75, 80 years.
That's correct.
And they're, you know, just in pieces, but you know, it looks like, now we were talking about the wings icing over. And if people don't understand icing, what happens is there's so much lift on a wing. If it ices, it loses lift and the plane will go in.
That's correct.
So these things have got to be going in pretty hard.
I've only found 2 or 3 sites where it looks like it came in on a gentle glide path. In most cases, they come in at a steep descent angle or even spiraling, which means vertical.
Yeah.
In which case, they're just driven into the ground. That site that I was telling you about, where I found remains laying on the surface, that had to spiral in because it was a very large 4-engine aircraft, a B-24, and the actual footprint of the wreckage was no more than 1/4 of an acre. And we found debris into the ground 3-4 foot in rocks and all that. So that thing had to come in vertical.
Yeah. So I'm just intrigued at your mission. You know, we talk about flying our MIA flags out there and supporting our military. How much support do you actually get for doing this, bringing home our crews?
Almost zero. Almost zero. There's only been 2 expeditions where there was substantial outside funding, and that was from family members. It's never been from the Department of Defense. Not one single dollar has ever been received from Department of Defense, even though they have an agency that's supposed to be out there recovering these sites. I've given umpteen presentations to national service organizations, even veterans groups, never a single dollar in donations.
Interesting.
They just, I hate to say it, but I feel like I'm being brought in to entertain them. And it's a very serious subject. And I'm not an entertainer.
No. It is very serious. When we bring home our guys,
Yeah.
you know, it doesn't get any more serious than that.
Yeah.
And so no support from the government at all?
Zero. Matter of fact, sometimes I think that they'd rather I not be out there finding these sites.
Do you find any cooperation with the U.S. government at all on what you're doing?
You know, I put all my reports and photos on the website, and I have contacts there, and I'll send them the reports as well. But when I did a recovery of a B-25 on the India-Burma border a few years ago, the director assistant director, chief legal officer, and director of external communications of the agency at DOD all texted me within days of my departure, telling me not to do it, warning me not to go over there and do this, even though all funding had been raised, permits had been obtained, everything was set to go, and they all warned me not to go. And when I got over there, my guide was no longer, he was not there. And I found out he'd been summoned to the U.S. Embassy by our ambassador, and they put pressure on him not to work with me. So fortunately, I had a backpack full of cash, and I was able to do the mission.
Right.
But it had to be done through alternate, avenues.
So you hire these people when you get over.
I have people, preferred team members in every country where I operate. But when I'm going to a very specific location, we hire porters and local people because they're the only ones who know how to get there.
Right.
On a map and Google Earth, it looks pretty simple, but it's not simple. You have to know what rivers to cross, where to cross, and when to cross them. It's so easy to get killed over there, and it's mainly on the river crossings.
I bet. It's interesting. And they welcome you over there? I mean,
with open arms. Yeah, with open arms. I've been, one of the most incredible experiences of being welcomed actually happened in China, and a family wanted me to go find a C-47 that disappeared in the early war years. And when I got to the town closest to where I thought the wreck was, the gentleman who owned the guest house was so happy to have me there, and he didn't speak a word of English, but he knew all about the Flying Tigers, Claire Chenault, and the pilot of this plane was a former Flying Tiger. So anyway, he refused to let me pay for my room, my meals, even my bar bill, and then he even supplied a four-wheel drive Toyota Land Cruiser with a driver and interpreter, and refused to take any money. He was just so happy to have me there.
Yeah, it's amazing. The people are so much different between the governments,
That's
with
correct.
a lot of friction between China and the U.S.
Once you deal with the people, you find that they're really good.
So give us your website. You have a website.
Right. The website is miarecoveries.org, and .org means that it's a 501c3 nonprofit public charity. So any donations that come in are deductible by that donor.
And if somebody wants to donate, again, it's 501c. It helps you with your mission and bringing them home. When's your next mission coming up?
Well, I could go to New Guinea and find a B-17 in May. That's the driest time of the year in that area of New Guinea, but I don't think I'll have funding for that by May. So if I don't have funding for that, then the next expedition would be back to the India-Burma border, and that would be November, December of this year.
Yeah.
There's a particular C-46 I'd like to find on that border. A retired police detective in New York had contacted me several years ago to tell me about his father, and his father was an Army officer aboard this C-46 as a passenger, and the plane disappeared on the hump, and I've done a lot of research, and I know I can find it on this next expedition, so that'll be the target.
Yeah, and this gentleman is actually the father or the son of...
That's correct. He's the son. So this is his father, and his father was an officer at the time. So the gentleman in New York, I would say, I've never asked him his age, but I would say he's probably around 80.
Yeah.
And so hopefully I'll find that plane on the next expedition.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've kind of run out of questions. Your mission is so honorable, and I think it's something that hopefully, while we're putting the spotlight on it, there will be people out there that want to donate and give you some funding to keep on going out there and bringing our guys home.
Yeah, the way I see it, if any organization or government office is flying that black and white, remember the POW MI flags, then by golly, they ought to do something to back that up. Otherwise, it's just empty words. It's meaningless. Yeah. There's only a few of us Americans out there looking for these MIAs. There's a few who concentrate on the islands of the Southwest Pacific, but I'm the only one who focuses on South Asia and what was known as the hump. But I do operate globally, and like I said, I just got back from a successful search in Chile, and I'll be going to New Guinea as soon as I can afford that as well.
So one of the things that I wanted to bring out is, our modern aircraft, if it goes down, they've got all these locators and they're able to find them really quick. back in World War II, we did not have that technology.
That's correct.
So when it went down, we didn't know where it was at,
And it was the middle of a war, and they didn't have the resources to divert, and because everyone was so busy fighting the war. And then after the war, it was, kind of like chaos, demobilizing and repatriating everybody and all the equipment. So I can understand why they just didn't have the time or resources to focus on that at that time. But with each passing year and each passing decade, it becomes harder to find these wrecks. For example, the one in Chile was in a steep, rocky ravine, and already much of the wreckage had been covered by boulders from landslides, because that's in the Andes. And the Andes was created by tectonic plates and earthquakes and such. So with each passing year, it becomes more difficult to find these sites.
I bet. Yeah. Well, thank you, Clayton. Thank you for coming in
welcome.
and giving us the story and your mission. And, one of the things that we always close our show with is thanking our military. I want to thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Every little bit helps.
You bet. And hopefully somebody will take heed to that. And I want, this is from my wife and I, and keep going on your mission.
I'm going to keep going as long as I can. I'll tell you that.
You bet.
So there's nothing else I'd rather do. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
So again, thank you to our prior and current serving military. Thank you for our law enforcement, our firefighters who are out there every day keeping our streets safe. And with that, Prescott, we're going to wrap the show up. Next week, I have Phil Good on, so stay tuned. Phil's running for Prescott Mayor, and we're going to pick his brain on a few subjects here. So until next time, thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.